Hello, everyone. I'm Adrian Sanabria, host of the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast and founder of the Defenders Initiative. Welcome to this webcast sponsored by Run Zero. I have two guests with me today, Todd Beardsley, VP of Security Research at Run Zero. How you doing, Todd?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing excellent. I'm really looking forward to today's webcast. I'm looking forward to any questions the audience might have. It's just, this is my sweet spot. This is both my happy place, my ranty space, all of that. Also with us, HD Morris, CEO and founder of Run Zero. How are you doing, HD?
I'm doing great. Also my happy place, right? I've been working on this stuff for like 25 years, and it's been fun to watch it go from like nNAP and Nessus to everything it is now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's been a heck of a ride, and yeah, you've come all the way through it, right? from Metasploit to Rapid7 to Run Zero, and yeah, excited to get started here. So before we get started, as you've gathered, we're talking about fixing the very broken vulnerability management tool space, not just tools, but process as well. But before we jump into the conversation, I want to direct your attention to the blue bubbles at the bottom of your screen. The first one there is the chat box. You can ask questions there. You can chat with other attendees. You can just say hello. And I'll be checking that throughout the discussion. So feel free to ask a question as it comes to you. Don't wait to ask your questions at the end. I find it works better if we pull your question into the context of the conversation that we're having at the time. And the other button I want to draw your attention to is the third one from the left. That is the handouts button. And we've got two handouts in there, one divining risk. They're both PDFs, and the other is a Run Zero solution brief. So be sure to grab those. You can grab them now. You can grab them at the end. I'll try and remind you again. You can download those at any time. All right, with that, let's jump into it. All right, so getting started here. When we say vulnerability management, it is a broad term these days, right? We've seen it go from open source Nessus before it became commercial, and CVEs and infrastructure scanning. Then Web 2.0, all of a sudden we've got DAST and SAST and things like that, all the way through cloud. Basically any new attack surface that needs to be scanned to external attack surface management containers. So I just kind of want to level set here. And I know Run Zero has been expanding. There's a lot of integrations with different products. So I kind of want to level set on what area of vulnerability management we are talking about versus not talking about.
Cool. Yeah, just kind of take it from the top. So we mostly focus on vulnerabilities in specific assets, devices, cloud components, things like that. Most of our customers turn to us because we focus on organizations that have a lot of physical infrastructure. So whether it's manufacturing, clinical, healthcare, et cetera, you have a lot of stuff. So it's not going to be a CSPM only product. So we really focus on how do you find vulnerabilities in everything, even things that are like, a dusty DSL modem in a closet you haven't looked in 3 years, that type of thing. But we're generally not talking about today are things like SAST, DAST, application scanners, some of like the deep like CSPM cloud configuration stuff with like there's great tools for that stuff. And we're really focused on identifying kind of the broader exposure.
Yeah,
Right.
for sure. And there's like when we talk about it, oftentimes people will think like, oh, so like manufacturing floors and like places where industry happens. But we're actually in, so we just ended up having a webcast about a week ago maybe, with North Carolina school districts. And schools are crazy. They are full of not just like Chromebooks that kids do homework on and bring in and out of the environment, but like, all your smoke alarms, vape alarms now in the bathrooms, naughty kids. A lot of surveillance equipment there for safety, right? Like there's a lot of security cameras and stuff like that. And so like, we do a pretty good job with all like the weird things that have computers that don't look like computers.
They also have a built-in class of adversary / future InfoSec professionals, right?
They've got a constituency that kind of doesn't want to be there.
You mean the teachers? Or?
All right.
Yes, that's what I mean.
So, Todd, defining vulnerability management here, jumping into, I think generally when people think vulnerabilities, they think about a CVE or something with a CVE attached to it. But we find that, particularly when we look at the other side of things, how attacks happen, there are a lot of things that are really adjacent to vulnerability management, and it's kind of a fuzzy space. So help us out here with this kind of fuzzy space between something that gets a CVE or doesn't get a CVE, and there's even stuff in the middle that sometimes get CVEs and sometimes don't, where people don't necessarily agree on whether or not it should get one.
So, as you know, but just for the audience's edification, I've been working on CVE specifically for a number of years now. I'm on the CVE editorial board. I care a lot about CVEs. That said, CVEs are not everything, and they're kind of a far way away from everything. CVEs is like the easiest case where like you have some software vulnerability that wasn't intended that lets a user do something that they oughtn't be able to do, right? Like read a secret or run code or something like that. That's typical normal case for what a software vulnerability is. But really, like, there's so much more than that, right? There are insecure defaults, for example, and that ranges from insecure default credentials, something shipping with like admin, or root or something like that, or I don't know, Scott Tiger was one of the old ones that you would find a lot of
Oracle
stuff.
Yeah, or Sun.
Insecure configurations, like when you're making a thing and you want it to talk on a network, like job 1 is get it to talk on the network, and job 4 is like, and also don't let some people talk to it. And so those kind of like insecure configurations rarely get like a CVE identifier. Sometimes they'll show up in like a DoD STIG, which there are thousands of these things, by the way. And this is like a class of like describing a configuration that you should configure away from, right? Oftentimes, like you'll have something that just doesn't have like something modern on it, right? Like for a long time, like not being encrypted is just like totally outside of the purview of CVE. Nowadays, every once in a while, you'll see a CVE that says like, hey, you're doing things in clear text and you shouldn't. That is newish for CVE, and hopefully getting to be more and more common, right? Like as everything gets like SSL style encrypted, SSL/TLS, of course. Anything that like exposes a telnet port like tends to not get a CVE unless someone really cares a lot and like is ready to go to bat for that. So there's like all of these things, right, that like are in the space for things that get people hacked but aren't called software vulnerabilities. And that's kind of the zone where like I think Run Zero really shines.
Yeah. There's a flip side though that's pretty awful. You see a lot of new vuln management tools where the only thing they do is report vulnerabilities with CVEs, and then they only do so based on version number lookups through CPE. So if you take a product that has like software inventory and you look at the list of vulnerabilities for those software versions, you can technically assign a CVE to it and say, look, this device probably has a CVE. But there's many products now in the space, especially introduced in the last 2 years, where that's all they do. So if you're buying a vuln management product and you're buying something that's effectively just a software version notifier, it's like, well, that doesn't really help you against every other vulnerability out there that's not based in software inventory. And also all the issues that don't have CVs at all, like Todd kind of mentioned, default credentials, all the fun stuff that hackers actually use.
Well, and if your prioritization depends on CVSS or EPSS, you have to have a CVE, right? You can't even do a lookup in EPSS without a CVE, right?
EPSS is dependent on CVE. You will never get an EPSS score unless you have a CVE. But also, but for one, EPSS scores change every day, which is a subtlety that weirdly, like some vulnerability management.
That's a feature, Todd.
I understand. And it's a great feature. I love it. I love that it moves around. But there are vulnerability management products that just like take whatever the EPSS score is the day that it is generated, and that's what it is forever, according to them, which is incorrect. So like, and I've been looking lately, specifically in the Defining Risk paper that is downloadable right there. You can read all about EPSS. And like, I'm really interested in the deltas between EPSS. So like, why did something move 30 or 40 points in a day and then move back, right? Like, why does that happen? Because that usually means like something happened in the world, like there's a new nuclei exploit for it, or a new Metasploit module or something like that, or it got talked about by an important person on Twitter. Can move EPSS scores around.
Right.
So like that's interesting, right? Like it's not nothing, right? Like I'll tell you, like if one HT more goes on Mastodon and says, "Hey guys, look at this," like that will move an EPSS score, and I think it's probably right to do so.
I know
Right.
Todd's
Right.
being a little humble, but Todd and I both worked on the Metasploit project for a long time. And anytime we added some Metasploit module to something, we basically moved the needle for what people had to patch. So in a lot of ways, we were driving that top line of vuln management for 15 years in a lot of ways, because if as soon as Metasploit added coverage for it or there's an exploit available, it went from being something that you might care about to something you must care about.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And so like when you're if you're the premise here of prioritize your CVEs using these other things, like EPSS moves around a lot. Oftentimes they don't have CVSS scores. If they're interesting enough, sometimes CISA will come in and give you a CVSS score, but that's not guaranteed, right? So there's today, I think it's about a third or so modern CVEs like don't have a CVSS score like when they're published, and then that'll drop over time if they're interesting enough for someone to bother. So even if you're relying on CVE, which you shouldn't, you're still like missing a bunch of stuff that just is unscored and unlooked at.
Yeah. Yeah, and I should mention that I think it was earlier this year, you guys started exposing CVE information in Run Zero, correct?
Mm-hmm.
We've been doing a little bit of we'll be importing vuln data from other vuln scanners for a long time. And more recently, we added a full-blown vuln scanner in Run Zero itself. And we do it kind of three different ways. We'll create a query that matches a vulnerability against devices you already have in your inventory. So if there's a new Palo Alto vulnerability like this second, we know your machine isn't patched because there's no patch available yet. And
you don't need to do the scan, right?
So all I'm going to do is say, like, here's a query, here's your Palo Altos, go, you're done. That's a really quick way to notify people within seconds what they need to go solve. Then we do the standard, active vuln scanning where we do deep fingerprinting to be safe, things like that. And the last category we do is really interesting. We look at most vuln scanners only look at every individual asset and then say this asset has these vulnerabilities, the score will be X. We actually look at the relationship between assets across the entire organization. So if we see the same asset sharing crypto keys in 5 different places, or we see a device that's external and internal because we identified the same unique ID, we can say this device is significantly problematic because it's either cloned or it's got a shared security state with this other device, or it's actually directly exposed to the internet. And it's kind of neat being able to do that kind of relational vulnerability analysis at scale.
Yeah, for sure. And we're going to get into that a little bit more, applying context and things like that. But before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about the primary goals of vulnerability management, because I have at least 2 meetings a week with different enterprises about their vulnerability management problems. And I've kind of broken these down into things that are more concerned with getting hacked. So identifying a need for a rapid response. So you just described that perfectly, HD. We already know you have Palo Altos. There's a 0-day that was just disclosed today. Go forth and fix stuff. And so you're going to patch out a cycle, put mitigations in place ASAP, versus how are the IT folks doing with their device management? Are they managing the devices at all? First of all, are these things unmanaged? Maybe they don't have asset owners. Identifying maybe slow patch management, no patch management. Maybe they patch just fine, and we can just ignore all that stuff. That's just going to get fixed in the next update that comes through. And then there's the stuff that you have more time, right? So compliance stuff, I got to have my quarterly clean scan for PCI. I've got to get it done for the SOC 2 for some kind of questionnaire for ISO 27K. This is stuff where we're not dropping everything, and maybe that more traditional, scan, get results, deal with results process kind of works.
That's about right.
That's how I think about it.
Yeah.
I think you can ask anybody in the space, they'll say there's only 3 states, right? There is something I've got to do now, something I've got to do soon, and something I don't care about. And that's it. Because anything that's lower in that tier, you're never going to have time for, because those first 2 things will pop up first.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And maybe score gets you to one of those buckets, but other than that, I don't really care about score. Like what's a low? Like, am I going to fix it now? Am I going to fix it later or never? Or yeah, right. I don't care.
Yeah, well, if you have like a vulnerability management system that is flagging like a whole bunch of vulnerabilities, right? That don't use your compliance tooling to not get hacked, right? I guess is what I'm kind of driving at here, is that like, cool, I have a new report and it's Microsoft Patch Tuesday, right? And so like, awesome, I have 120 new vulnerabilities to maybe do something with. But like, honestly, like most of those are going to be auto patched out from under you before you do anything. And these are things like, your Office bugs or like Microsoft Edge bugs, things like that. But then on the flip side, in that Patch Tuesday set, like you might have like an Exchange bug that you really do care about, right? And Exchange is a bear to patch. And so like you got to start scheduling for it. Thank you very much for telling me that I have this bug in Exchange. I probably already kind of guessed it myself, but that's fine. Keep alerting, if I don't do something with it. But like, those are the kinds of things that you are patching because you don't want to get hacked, not because you want to like hit your clean scan state.
Right. So I kind of want to outline how I see most organizations doing vulnerability management today, and kind of hand back to you, Todd, to talk a little, or to both of you, to talk about how you see teams struggling today. And it's a long list. We have a lot of items on that list. We'll try and hit most of them, but yeah, typically, you go out, you buy one of the QRTs, the Qualys Rapid7 Tenable, are the most popular. I don't think that's any secret still at this point. You choose you install it. You choose a default profile. You change nothing in configuration, right? You input a target range to scan, and you start the scan. Eventually, results come back, and your head explodes. And that's how I end up on these calls with people who are just trying to like trying to hold it all in there. So and something to add here. At least once a month, I talk to a company who has just run their first vulnerability scan, not because they're a new company, but because regulation has never forced them to, no business partners ever forced them to, until now. They're going through some kind of questionnaire, some kind of sales process, and somebody's like, well, what's your vulnerability state, right? Like, what does your last pen test look like? Well, they've never had a pen test, never had a vulnerability scan. It's a 100-year-old manufacturing company. And they're like, what do people do with these results, right? They're looking at like 250,000 critical vulnerabilities, and they're like, surely, like, this isn't the state of this product, right? This product's been around.
Surely not everyone was kung fu fighting.
So Todd, go.
That's the thing, right? Like, I think that when you're looking to run a vulnerability management program, often for the first time, like you say, you really want something that's opinionated, that will like, please don't bother me about all the billions of things that I know that are here that are low priority, which means no priority, as HD alluded to. And let me know, like, in the ideal state, you want to know, like, okay, this is, network accessible, no privileges, I can run code however I want, right? Like, worst case, right? I want my worst case up top, and I want to know that they're actually exposed, right? And so, like, if I have a system that wants to log into everything and check for the presence of patches, like, that doesn't help me too much, because I don't know if like that particular, maybe it doesn't have this particular patch because it doesn't ever expose that feature or function or whatever it is, right? This is a trap that a lot of vulnerability like your first scan will fall into, right? You say, oh, I'm missing like 40 bazillion Linux kernel patches. Okay, who cares? Like, this is a thing that only talks on a private network, or
it's a refrigerator.
It may be a refrigerator. Well, we'll get into that later, of like, what is a Linux 2.26 system?
It's everything.
But like, you want to be able to say, like, all right, I need to have some kind of opinion. I need to have some kind of like built-in thing. So I have something that's tractable, something I can actually do, something that does require my attention, and I can't just rely on auto patching my way to success. Those are the kinds of things that you want to look at if your goal is to not get hacked. If your goal is to satisfy a compliance report, well, you get to deal with all of this, and usually that means hitting the exception button a lot in your product to say, like, no, we accept this risk. We accept this risk. I've seen that a lot of times.
There's something kind of like what Adrian and Todd said, like the first time you run a vuln scan, you get millions of results and you're not really sure what to do with it. And even worse, those millions of results you're looking at are actually still missing half your stuff. So what
Yeah.
happens is a lot of times the vuln scanners, they won't give you data unless they can authenticate to an asset. Did you provide a credential for VMware? Did you provide a credential for Nutanix? If not, you're not getting any data from those systems when you scan them. What about the machines that have Defender Firewall turned on? Well, your WMI scans are not going to work for those, right? So you get all this data about all the assets that it's able to connect to, but these products are not particularly good at telling you what they don't see and where they fail to authenticate. So one of the things that I recommend looking at is whatever your vuln scanner is, they typically all report a vulnerability for authentication failed. That is your most significant vulnerability. That and end of life, the ones you care about the most. Find every machine where authentication didn't work and treat that like a sub one problem, because that's a system where you have zero visibility beyond the surface. It's just hard to. Another area people run into is that a lot of vulnerability checks are turned off by default. If you, for example, Tenable's great product, but it turns off thorough and paranoid mode by default. And some of the rapid vulnerability coverage pieces that get shipped, ones that are really critical in terms of timing, Palo Alto, SonicWall, et cetera, they're actually hidden behind those paranoid and thorough modes. So if you don't know what options to check, you don't get the coverage either. And it's really tough because unless you're really familiar with the platform, you don't know which knobs and buttons to turn to get better visibility and how to understand where you don't have visibility afterwards.
Yeah.
And that's the whole reason I bought the product, right? Like, I don't know how to find this stuff. Like, don't also make me get a degree in, configuration management, configuring the tool itself to be able to use it correctly.
A lot of products will have in their documentation of like, oh, and don't use this to scan your OT environment. And it's like, well, okay. I mean, I did buy this product to tell me where like my network segmentation failed, for example, right? It's like, oh, I'm leaking OT stuff over here, but don't run this in your OT. Like you end up in a very paradoxical situation of like, I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to like, get a good sense of like what all my stuff is and what my exposure looks like. But like as she says, like a lot of the good stuff is also dangerous, I guess. Like, which is a bummer, right? Because it's like, oh no, I want to run the good ones. I want to run like the hardcore Nessus scan because I'll tell you what, as we say in Texas, that's what the bad guys do, right? The bad guys don't worry about crashing your stuff, and so they will run the hard scan.
So I think that's worth a note as well here. That I've seen fat fingered IP address CIDR entries. I've seen vulnerability management teams that didn't realize that an entire class B was something that was used by telecom or something like that, because telecom's outside of IT and they manage their own stuff. Most of these scanners by default aren't scanning all the ports, right? So like there's all these gaps just all over the place, that I think lead to people missing stuff. But one of the key ones, if you think about what a vulnerability scanner does, it's got to do three things. It's got to find the host, right, which is pretty easy on an internal network, right? Most things respond to ARP, to a few ICMP, a few different things. Then you got to identify it. And then more than three. You got to find open ports and services, and then you got to interrogate those services and figure out if there's any vulnerabilities on them. And it's that step two. I'm not just going to raise my second finger because all that's true. But it's that step two where I find a lot of these things going off the rails, much like my ability to count things, where if once it misidentifies it or just tells you informational Linux 2.6, shrug, port 80's open. In the times that I've been a pen tester, that's often the most juicy stuff. I find something with port 80 open, Linux 2.6. I'm thinking default creds, right? I'm thinking I'm going to find some kind of configuration console, and I'm going to do, there's going to be something in the HTML that tells me what it is. I'm going to do a quick Google search, and I'm going to have default creds for it, and I'm in. And that doesn't even get a score, right? Those are just informational findings.
Funny enough,
it's not a score. It's not a vulnerability. It's not, it's not nothing. It's just like, oh, that's just how it works.
Yeah. Funny enough, we rolled out a default login coverage and web portal detection in Run Zero a couple months ago, and they're still our number one findings across the board. It's like default login in some random web panel, default login in this, HVAC appliance, and that's just all day long what people have not been seeing otherwise from their vuln scanners. It's pretty crazy.
All right. Give me just a second here. I've got to reboot something.
No problem. Did you get scanned by something like untoward?
No, it's my. Let me get things back working here again.
Well, while you're futzing with that, Adrian, I want to pick up the thread that HD had alluded to earlier, and that is, okay, no, can't authenticate. That's a 7.1 issue. Is EOL? Is this a 7.1 issue? I kind of think so. We've been kind of beating on this EOL drum here at Run Zero for the last ever, and also the last 4 to 6 weeks or so. EOL is a very it's a sneaky one, because just because like an operating system or a device or a piece of software or something goes end of life does not mean it's like instantly hackable, but it does mean like, oh, well, now you get no more information on this thing, for at least two reasons, right? One, the vendor is not producing patches for the thing anymore. So even if there is a cool bug on it with a great exploit and it's all in nuclei or Metasploit or whatever, you're out of luck. Like if this thing is exposed, there's no fixing it like intrinsically. You can do some extrinsic stuff. You can like configure around it or whatever. But like intrinsically, this bug is your bug forever now, until you decommission this device. And then secondly, researchers aren't looking at these things anymore because they're boring and they don't get DEF CON talks. Now, I will challenge the audience. Write B-Side San Francisco just extended their deadline. Write a B-Sides talk about all your cool Windows XP bugs that you never told anybody about. This would be an excellent talk and will cause some consternation in the world, because there's a lot that still runs on Windows XP. There's a lot that runs on like XP-like kind of stuff, like things that live in kiosks, things that live in like very dedicated, like, specialized gear, all runs like Windows ME, Windows XP, Windows 8 stuff, right? No one looks at these things and no one publishes findings on these things, which means that like, I say no one, but I mean like no one in the DEF CON crowd, right? But like intelligence agencies have bugs for these things, guaranteed. And they stay quiet and they don't get detected and they never get fixed. So like those are your two kind of prongs on like why EOL is pretty suspicious.
The challenge, if you look at any vuln management dashboard, EOL is just one high-risk finding. Now, if you've got a device with 10 high-risk findings, that may look more important, but that one EOL finding could be hiding dozens, hundreds, thousands of bugs, right? There actually is a neat CFP / contest for hacking obsolete dead devices. District Con runs one called Junkyard, which is awesome. I threw that in chat. So if you ever want to show up and abuse some old end-of-life devices, that's the place to do it.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me now?
Definitely.
Yeah. No? Yeah.
All good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Yeah. Sometimes my Focusrite just loses its mind and I have to reboot it. All right. Yeah. So, one of the things I wanted to mention also is just a difficulty of doing a scan. In some organizations, I've seen someone whose only job it is to make sure scans run and that they complete and that they continue running and that they're distributed enough. Like just getting to all the things, especially if you're doing authenticated scans. Like I found out the hard way. I won't name the product, but you guys are familiar with it. I found out one product kills itself after 24 hours. And for weeks, I didn't realize this. I just kept going through vulnerability results being like, why am I missing stuff? And of course, you have to open the 8 gigabyte log file to find out the reason is that at the 24-hour mark, exactly, it just kill-9s your scan, regardless of where it is. So, okay, like that's fine. I'll distribute the scan more, but nothing told me that the tool didn't tell me that it was just going to kill my stuff if it ran too long. So like that's a challenge as well. Is like I know folks where the next scan starts before the previous scan finishes.
I've been there. I used to work IT at Dell and at Westinghouse, and these are large flat enterprises. Dell, I think, had one of the first /4s. I want to say. I think they inherited one from HP at one point. But yeah, Dell was massive, and we had to do a lot of that. But this was ancient times. Surely that's not still going on.
So I want to kind of move on here to actually, this might be a good place to answer a question here. We got a good question in the chat from Jenny. She asks, how do you align the vulns found with internal scanning with the ones found during a pen test? Are these two activities similar enough that there's a solution where they can be easily combined? I think it's a really good, there's a lot of good aspects to that question. HD, you want to take that?
Yeah, just my own experience, both running vuln management program as a CISO and then also doing pen test work, there's almost zero overlap. Oftentimes, like everything reported by the pen test team is something that doesn't show up at all in the Nessus report. I think if you end up getting a lot of overlap between those two things, you're probably hiring the wrong pen test team. You're probably hiring somebody who's just turning around running Nessus, giving the results for it. But end of the day, I think if you've got a platform for triaging your vulnerability data using VPT, using something like our product, you can bring both those results together, create a manual result, set the risk however you want to, and just make sure they get triaged the same way, no matter what the source. Something else we like to do is that anytime my early days I was working in MSSP, so we'd find new vulnerabilities during our pen test work, then we add those checks to Nessus, and then we'd run Nessus with those checks. And so our customers were constantly getting their scores knocked down from higher to lower because we kept finding new vulnerabilities in their banking systems. That was our sector at the time. And they got really mad. Like the more vulnerabilities we found, the lower their score got. And there was this perverse incentive by customer to not find stuff.
Yeah.
And so at some point they said, we don't want you adding new vuln checks that are permission. We're like, guys, like you're kind of missing the point here. Like we're trying to help you out.
I have been requested to lower the score of things on pen tests before because it was going to make somebody's life hard. Yeah, been there. So the flip, I think this is a great, well, and again, I think that's, and we're going to talk more about this towards the end, but there's different priorities, and I think it's worth even thinking of vulnerability management as separate processes. With different goals. And I think that's okay as long as everybody's explicit about it and on the same page. Right. So HD, I want to come back to you here. I think talking about comparing pen tests to internal scans, this kind of where the rubber meets the road, like reality meets what your scanner's telling you. What can real world attacks tell us about what we're doing right or wrong with vulnerability management?
The great thing about pen test or having great notes after an incident is what people will do after they get access, right? Vulnerability management is very much about finding out how people can get initial access, and it doesn't really do a great job of everything after that first initial access point. Where pen tests very much are get initial access as quick as you possibly can, and then it's just all lateral movement, living out the LAN, dumping credentials, relaying permissions, finding configuration vulnerabilities. So all that stuff is really useful. It's kind of like your hardening step. So these days, what we see is a lot of pen tests start off already with access to your system. You start off and give the pen tester a shell on a random laptop that has no privileges and say, go from here, because I don't want you wasting your time trying to have to hit some initial access vulnerability that we know you're going to find eventually anyways. Let's just start off in a place that's a little bit more reasonable in terms of where our risk is. So that's kind of where you see the schism these days, is that vuln management tends to be very focused on initial access, where pen testing tends to be very focused on lateral movement and internal controls.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
We've got some interesting stats here. Did these come from you, Todd?
Oh, I'm sorry.
The M trends.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So the most recent M trends report, which I believe is M trends 2025, they talk about, and all the other big reports reflect this, but basically there's a lot of teeth gnashing and clutching of pearls, saying like, and exploits are responsible for more initial access than ever. And then you look and you're like, it's up to like 33%, which means 66% of the time there is no CVE identified exploit, vulnerability that was exploited to get that initial
But of
access.
Those 33%, how many CVEs are we worrying about here?
Looks like 4. 4. And so you will see like the most favorite ways to get initial access is not by exploits, it's by other things. It's like click on this bad link, or I guess a credential or something like that. But of the ones that are an exploit, it is exploits in mostly security devices that are sitting on your edge. So they have to be exposed to the internet. That's what they do, and their job is to do security. But they are exposed. Like, people are allowed to ship bugs, okay? Like, bugs are fine. Like, it's how you fix them after the fact. But boy, it sucks when the thing that you bought to do like a secure thing, like offer VPN or offer firewalling, is itself exploited. And those tend to be favored, and we tend to hear about these particular kinds of exploits after they're already used, after they've already been deployed, usually by some kind of espionage agency, occasionally by criminals, usually fast follow the espionage folks on those things. And so, like, by the time you hear about it, if you're not in that first wave, like, great job for not being interesting, I guess. But you're gonna be in that second wave, like, right now. So so more of the story is, we've got 250,000, just about a little over now, 250,000 CVEs have been published, and in the last year, 4 seem to matter the most.
Yeah, so I've got some of my own research here that I think adds credence to this. Where I went through the Verizon Vera's VCDB database, and I found 1,165 CVE mentions, but
Sure.
those boil down to only 37 unique CVEs. And then out of that 1165, out of those mentions that are correlated with incidents, and by no measure is this comprehensive. We don't get transparency into a lot of breaches. There's a lot of missing information here, but 750 out of that 1165 are just the same 3 Move It DMZ CVEs over and over and over and over, because they just created an exploit, scanned the whole internet, and just auto-pwn everything, right?
We saw that with some of the Cisco bugs too. Like, within 30 days, before Cisco had actually been able to provide a patch at all, every single internet-facing ASA was compromised, all in the course of 30 days, over 165,000 devices. And it was terrible, because everyone was actually watching the backdoors happen in real time. And then even after the patch was available, still something like 35,000 were confirmed owned the next day.
All right, so I want to jump into solutions here. We've got about 22 minutes left. We've got some more good questions coming in, so I want to give enough time. I think we've kind of outlined the brokenness of vulnerability management pretty completely here. There are other things, but probably not worth diving into at this point. So, where to start here? So, there is a whole class of tools that have emerged to try and fix this problem of, I've got too much data. I need to add context to that data. I need to add data to that data, right? I've got all this intelligence I can use. Does an exploit exist? Is this a critical asset? What's the criticality of this asset? Is it a crown jewel? So kind of thoughts on all the different methods out there, maybe starting with risk-based vulnerability management. Then we can start, we can also talk about like the pros and cons of authenticated scans, to try and help prioritize here, add context to these things that help us decide, is this a drop everything or is this a wait?
I struggle a little bit with a lot of the risk-based vuln management approaches, because effectively they're bringing in third-party vuln data that is pretty weak already. It has a bunch of gaps in the data. It's missing unauthenticated scans. It's missing some devices that are firewalled off, and then it's trying to let you prioritize that based on asset criticality. But you're not even starting with the right list. You don't even have the right assets. You don't know what the right controls are.
Garbage in, garbage out type of situation.
But if you're going to call all your vuln scanners garbage, like, what else are you going to do at this point? So I think the whole VPT RVVM model was created because people didn't know what to do with all that data. And kind of what the drum we've been banging on is, you just need better data to start with. Like, you can't solve this problem by chewing the same data 3 or 4 more times, right? You have to make sure you've got full coverage of everything. Like, do a full RC 1918 discovery. Make sure you understand every network in your environment. Make sure that you identify what machines where credentials don't work. Identify machines where authenticated scanning is not going to help you out, and really start trying to focus on closing the gap. A similar challenge, though, is that everything in the security industry is designed to make better coverage more expensive. So if you're done it, you let's say you find out that half your assets are missing CrowdStrike, and that's your EDR. Well, that's a lot of money to pay
Yeah.
to go close the gap. Like, there's a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to do that. Same thing with vuln scanning. You realize your vuln scanner is only covering 30% of your environment, which is a pretty typical ratio from what we've seen. Can you afford to buy licenses for the other 70%? And it's those kind of rules that really make getting to full coverage and full visibility and security difficult.
And there's a lot of poorly set up incentives also. Like it's very common to track vulnerability counts. And again, that disincentivizes having better visibility because better visibility makes line go up, right?
Right.
And when line goes up, I get slapped on the knuckles. So maybe I don't want better visibility if that's a metric that I'm being held to. So that's one of the first things that I recommend pulling out is just incentivizing based on raw vulnerability numbers, because then that disincentivizes going and finding more info. So, still with an asset management approach, with this, getting better data, you're still going to end up with a lot of stuff, right? Like maybe it's not 250,000 criticals, but you're still going to have to prioritize in some way, right? And you already mentioned one thing, find the stuff that you can't authenticate with, like you're starting to categorize this data, right? Maybe identify assets with no asset owners attached to them, right?
Well, and it may be totally fine that like I can't authenticate to a thing. Maybe it's expected for that thing, right? It might be a piece of third-party gear that's like in my network for whatever reason, right? Or a lot of times if you have a physical presence somewhere, like you're in an office building, for example, there are plenty of things that are owned by the building that are not owned by the company, right? But as we've seen in many, many breaches over the years, like that the attacker doesn't care like who actually owns the things. And so like being able to at least articulate that and at least be able to say like, hey, here are these like kind of radioactive black holes in our network that I can't actually do much about. We can do something else there, right? You can instrument things around it. You can hassle your building owner, right? Like whoever's holding your lease is say like, hey, you have these, I know that you think they just look like Linux 2.6 devices. I know they're IP cameras because I use Run Zero and I could tell.
Yeah.
And so you can go to these actual asset owners and let them know, hey, pal, get your act together because you're putting me at risk here.
Yeah, and you're going to find a bunch of situations where, you've got 1,100 Hikvision cameras set up in your warehouses countrywide, but after the rollout, nobody was assigned as an asset owner, right? It's nobody's responsibility to manage those things, and that's a really important problem to solve.
Yeah,
but at least there doesn't have to be a credential handover because it's still all default creds, right?
Yeah, well, that makes it easy.
And as some customers have found out, if you're taking any kind of state money or money from the FCC and you have a hit conviction camera, well, you now get to replace all of them with something made in the US. And guess what? Every single one that's made in the US is also just rebranded Hikvision or to a camera. So good luck finding one actually made in the US. Yeah, it's tough.
Oh boy. So, some of the other recommendations here, I think one of the challenges I've found, and at one point I put together a really clever, and I've lost the code for it, Nmap scan, where I was trying to figure out how to scan all of RFC 1918 as quickly as possible, like just hitting the gateway, just to see if that class C is alive, trying to hit every class C in 1918 to find if you could put like a some kind of if you could identify all the routers and maybe put a listener on it. Is there some better trick to discover the network segments that maybe you're not scanning, or discover that maybe you're not scanning it from the right vantage point? Because this is like an architectural problem that I've found very, very difficult in large enterprises.
We built something specifically for this. So in Run Zero, you can go to RFC 1918 scan. It'll do subnet sampling. So you can tell what % of each subnet to sample. And we actually came up with a list of octets per subnet and per type of subnet based on the frequency in the real world. So we saw how does all of corporate America actually subnet their 10x and their 192 and their 72s and so on. And we use that to basically guess the most responsive octets in every single subnet. And so we'll go through and we'll trickle 9 to 10 different probes into between 3 and 25 IPs at each /24. And one of those will get a response. And even better, we get responses from the intermediate routers. So if a middle router says, hey, the subnet isn't available, we actually get the ICMP error response. We now know about that router. We know the router subnet. So all this does is come down to, basically it's a pre-scanner that provides a list of /24s that you should then do a full scan on. And unlike other tools that do a ping scan first, and then they scan the results if they respond to ping, we do all 620 odd ports for every host, no matter what, whether they respond or not. So we're able to find devices that just don't respond to anything except for maybe an obscure OT protocol or a weird UDP probe, things like that. So that's kind of a different approach that we would take. We've got a host pinger as well, but kind of the issue you mentioned is some parts of the network don't know about others. What we've built is the ability to do full RC and 1918 scans with a blast radius of maybe hop limit 2, hop limit 4, from anywhere you like in the environment. And if as long as you put those to different sites, you can then do a site comparison and say, what's different about site A and site B from these different vantage points? Did I see an entire subnet over here that I didn't see over there, or vice versa? You can start doing an actual ADV comparison of visibility from any point of the network for the full RFC19 scope.
Right. And another thing that I've seen you guys talk about a lot that I'm legitimately curious about myself is kind of like the whole external attack surface management space, like where are things going in the future, identifying stuff exposed to the public internet, both from the internal side of things and from the external side of things, right? Because on the one side, we've got external attack surface management that just look from the outside in. And of course, all the scorecard vendors, BitSight, Security Scorecard, all those that give you an F because TLS 1.0 is still turned on a web server somewhere. But like, how are you guys handling? Is that something that Run Zero can do as well to help me understand? Oh, this is exposed to the internet, or this is how it looks like from the outside in versus the inside out.
Definitely, yeah. It's a kind of cool set of approaches. We'll do the standard outside in, give us a domain name, we'll expand all the subdomains, we'll then scan it all from external hosted cluster and all that fun stuff. We'll also identify multi-homed assets from the outside. So if we can get an internal IP to leak out from the external side, we'll tell you what the internal IP is. And it's actually more common than not that we can do that just with some of the cool tricks we do. Then we go the other way. We start off in the internal network only, and we scan everything, and we create unique fingerprints for every single asset and service behind the firewall. And then we look at a giant database we created the daily scan data from Shodan. And we say, is there anything else in the entire internet that matches this unique fingerprint internally? We do that just using a key value lookup for overlap. So what we can tell you is, like, if we see the remote desktop port internal inside your environment, that particular thumbprint for that TLS cert should be unique. Nothing else should be using that RDP's TLS cert. If we find that anywhere on the internet, we know it's exposed and we know it's actually the same machine and we know exactly where it is. So by doing an internal kind of inside out scan that way, we can tell you this internal device is exposed on this crazy IPv6 IP you didn't even know about, and it's going directly back here into this network, and we know who the asset owner is because we've got the EDR data or at least an owner for that particular subnet. So the biggest challenge of doing outside in is you don't know who to contact. Like, okay, I found a server, but who is it? If you start inside out instead, you know exactly who to contact because you already know what the internal asset is.
Right. I think that's been a big challenge is, people who have a traditional vulnerability scanner and external attack surface management, that now trying to connect the data in some way, like there's no straightforward way to do it in a lot of cases. Yeah.
Folks are getting creative for sure, but it's challenging.
Yeah, so we've got, I think the last thing I wanted to cover, and then I want to jump to some of these questions that we've got here, is, again, and we talked about it earlier. I kind of think of the two different ways of doing vulnerability management, the two different use cases. One is concerned with not getting hacked, and the other is concerned with not getting fined or not getting a sale because you're not doing vulnerability scans, and they need a SOC 2 from you that says you're doing vulnerability scans. And very different timetables. One, like, fix it in 90 days is fine. The other one, fix in 90 days, like that, the barn door's open.
You've already been owned 10 times over.
Yeah. And I think, and there's two different approaches to do this. I think of them as scan-driven approaches. So the moment a 0-day comes out, everybody finds out at the same time. The engineer at Tenable who's going to write an Nessus plugin for it finds out at the same time that you find out. Because we all got the same email from CISA, from whoever did the disclosure. But that engineer has to build a plugin. They have to put it through QA, have to roll it out to production. Your scanner, I think Nessus still once a day pulls down plugins. Maybe you can tell it to do it once an hour or something like that. Your next scheduled scan runs, then a human has to go lay eyes on it and decide to do something with it. And that's a very long timetable compared to just acting the moment you find out about it. So I think of these as the scan-driven approach, which is fine for compliance, where you've got 90 days to do something, 45, whatever that timetable is, versus intel-driven. And this intelligence, this intel-driven approach requires you to know what you have. And I think that's the key lead in here, HD.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the goal. We realized that the only way to get ahead of some of these vulnerabilities quick enough is to already know about them in advance. And that doesn't mean we need to know what the product is or have a fingerprint for it. It just means you have to have the data and a way to go get it. So a great example is during the SolarWinds SEC amnesty period, we had a customer reach out and say, literally, we've got 72 hours for our entire enterprise scattered across the world to find every SolarWinds box before this amnesty period expires. Can you help? And we're like, yep, we can.
We're like, challenge accepted.
And we did not have a fingerprint for SolarWinds Orion at the time because it was just when all the noise had just come out. So what we did instead is we just created kind of a show didn't work. We said, find a device where the web page title looks like this, the fav icons like that. The device has these services and ports open. The name call has the word Orion in it. Like, we did all these different variants of a query that would probably find SolarWinds Orion's devices. And we're able to basically, do it all really quickly and find results. And that's kind of become the backbone of our rapid response programs. Anytime a new vulnerability comes out, it doesn't matter whether patch out is out or not. We're going to be getting an email in your inbox within seconds saying, here's all your internal or external devices affected by this thing, without having to do a rescan. And we're seeing that approach being picked up by more and more folks. Like, I believe Tenable is something called live scanning, or do something like that, where they kind of retroactively look for vulnerabilities from existing data. I believe other products are starting to do that type of approach, but it's definitely been our bread and butter for a long time. And it's the response speed that makes that worthwhile.
Yeah, and even for run zero rapid response stuff, like, a lot of times we don't really care what the technicals of the vulnerability are, and don't care that there's a patch or not, because that's not what we're looking for, right? We have pretty good fingerprinting on a pretty good set of gear that tends to exist in a lot of companies, right? And so, like, if we already have that and we already have that live, like, you don't have to wait for the Tenable engineer, to write the Nessus check or whatever, or whatever VM you're using that has to log into everything and check the registry for the existence of a patch to tell you yes or no you're exposed to this or not. Like, we can do it, just kind of out of the gate. And the thing that customers seem to really like about our rapid response stuff is that we publish the query like in the blog, and so
yeah, it's my favorite thing.
Right?
It's such a good way to sell the product, because it's like, how do I find F5 big IP instances in my network? Oh, you type in OS equals F5.
Yeah. And so it's not like magical, don't, look over here. We don't do any sleight of hand with any of that stuff. We are publishing exactly the query that you want to go run. And we hear, I'm just so delighted that your face lit up over that, Adrian, because that's the kind of response we get sometimes of like, oh, I didn't know you could write a query that way, right? And so we're also teaching people like how to use the product in a more advanced way, like just by having this like pretty kind of like, we'll do rapid responses usually once or twice a week, depending on internet weather. Sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 0. Like for the rapid response stuff, like, we can do more artistic flourishes in our query languages that are also performant and are also like interesting, and you can kind of apply this to something else that maybe has been bugging you for a while.
Yeah, I love it. It's one of those delightful things about the product. Like, I started following the blog post a while ago, and I started noticing those. And I just don't see like anybody else except for maybe Gray Noise doing this kind of stuff, where it was like, here's a query, go find stuff, go discover in the data. And one of the reasons I love it is because I've been using the product for a while, because you do have a community edition, which lets me get experience with how the product works, the different features in it. And a lot of new features are included in that community edition, like the vulnerability stuff. So delighted about that. And anybody listening, you can grab it. install it, have it installed in the next 15 minutes or so. Pretty easy to get up and running with a scanner on pretty much any device, I think, right?
runzero.com/try.
Here you go.
Yeah, we're very happy. Like, we have to sell enterprise software like any other big company, but we're very happy we also have a free tier that supports not just like home lab users, but also, small businesses
Mhm.
that can't afford a dedicated IT tool for this. So if you have less than 100 assets, it's free. Enjoy. We support you like anybody else do.
Yeah, that's awesome. So a few questions here I want to grab before we have to wrap here. So let's see. If I'm looking at a company's vulnerability scans and pen tests done internally, how to identify if they just set it up poorly? And I definitely have some experiences here. I'd like to hear from you guys, though.
The joke usually is if you see a certain vendor name on the report, you know it's done poorly. Like, if it's a fly-by-night shop and they are paying maybe $500 for someone to do the pen test to some bug bounty folks for a couple of weeks, you can get what you pay for, right? So, I mean, there's very different levels of pen test. In general, though, if you a neat trick is take the vulnerability name that they provide you in the report and just Google search them. And if your first hit is the Tenable plugin page, you know what's up. Like, that's the easy.
If it's a 1-to-1 match, yeah.
If they're just basically
Yep.
giving you output from Burp Suite or output from another vuln scanner, like, what are they actually giving you? You could have bought the tool and done it yourself. What you really want a pen test team to tell you is things you didn't know, things that are like strange and unexpected and weird dependencies, and things like there's no way your development team would have found out otherwise, besides them going down this rabbit hole to figure out that these things are linked together in a strange way. Like, that's where you get your money's worth from pen test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's all that lateral movement stuff that HT was talking about before. Like, have to underline that. Don't waste your pen test dollars per hour time on trying to trick your pen tester, right? Like, get them as enabled as you can, right? Like, give them the laptop that is plugged in to the wall in your enterprise, or give them like VPN creds or something, right? Don't waste time on that initial access. Get a pen tester to show you, if you don't have this already, like, what are the relationships between the systems that are internal? How does, like, someone clicking on a bad email, right? Like, that tends to still be the number one way to get initial access. So simulate that, right? Like, I already have a shell on some office worker's machine. How do I expand from there? That's how you get the most bang for your buck for pen testers. And like tattoos, cheap tattoos aren't good. Good tattoos aren't cheap. And I think the same thing goes for pen testing.
Yeah. And, for the question about internal stuff, how do you know when internal stuff is set up badly? It's still it's an extremely common thing that I see where it's just fat fingering. I worked with a company once that was scanning 14 of their websites. 13 of the domains were misspelled, and they were scanning by domain. They had somehow managed to leave the M off of .com on 13 of the 14, but because they got the first one in the list correct, they were getting results. And because they were getting results, they thought it was all working fine. So I actually used to do this. I started a consulting company back in 2017, and we're trying to reboot security services. What would they look like with the benefit of hindsight? And one of the things we did is we would just go through all your tool configurations to make sure you hadn't screwed anything up and done fat fingers and stuff like that. 100% of the time, we found major issues. So just walking through configurations and were the IP address ranges typed correctly, were the domain names typed correctly, that kind of stuff, I think goes a long way.
One gotcha we've seen too is that the network team will decide that they don't like your vuln scans anymore and just turn them off for a section of the network. And so all of a sudden your Tenable scans are missing hundreds of assets. And it's because your network team's like, we didn't like the traffic, so we just stopped it. I'm like, thanks guys.
How do you detect that?
At least let us know.
Yeah.
So one thing, we live and die by our asset graphs and Run Zero that we use internally to like dog food. So for our lab, if we ever see a massive jump or drop in asset services and accounts, like, we know there's a problem right away. That's either I screwed up my lab or something fell over or the switch died or I hit the wrong button and, Proxmox, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great tip. And that is all the time that we've got today. This has been excellent. Thank you so much, HD. Thank you so much, Todd.
Adrian, it's a pleasure. The thanks is all mine.
Also, big thanks to our sponsor, RunZero, for making today's webcast possible. As I mentioned, you can go grab it, run it for free, try it out. It is a blast to use, especially if you've never scanned your home network. You'll find a lot of interesting stuff. There's interesting stuff on home networks, I promise you. And finally, big thanks to the audience for joining us. We'll see you next time.